So we've already seen in 1 Peter, in the first couple chapters, how Peter is making this radical call to the church to submit, even corrupt kings like Nero, and to corrupt masters when they're in a condition as a slave. Now he turns in chapter 3 to the condition of women who may be suffering under husbands who are what he describes as opposed to the Word of God. So most likely unbelieving husbands. So how should they live? Well, he's saying submit and dress modestly. Now we hear that, we're like, whoa, wait a second. Is Peter just telling people to live in accordance with the standards of the culture? This can't certainly be inspired by God to tell him to submit like this to evil husbands. And I think part of the problem we misread this text, we misread what Peter's talking about, is because we read it through our own cultural bias, or maybe our own personal experience, or hearing stories of women in abusive situations. We imagine Peter saying, women have to be the 1950s June Cleaver, or Leave It to Beaver, barefoot and pregnant wives, and that's what the Bible's talking about. That's not really what he's saying here. And part of that is a misread, not just by filling the gaps from our own culture, but assuming something that about Peter's culture, that almost like we think that there's this unified Roman culture, but there wasn't. In this region, there'd be many different cultural expectations of what women could do. Some were well educated, some could be political or spiritual leaders, depending on where they were at within the culture. So he's not trying to sanctify Roman culture here. He's not making concession to culture. What he's trying to do is give advice to women that regardless of what their current circumstance is, and that includes us today, women today, they can submit to even these unbelieving husbands with faithfulness because they're really submitting to Christ. And that's his whole piece here. So when it deals with stuff like women being the weaker vessel, I really think this is a cultural piece. He's different than Paul. Now, Paul in his Ephesians letter is dealing with this idea that there's a universal difference based on creation between men and women. And his submission context is a little different. Peter's is really about a cultural condition where women are treated as weaker vessels. But he's saying, look, you're really vessels of Christ. It's that you contain the power of Christ in your life. And so based on this relationship that you have with Christ, the power of the Spirit of God living in you, you can submit to these unbelieving husbands just like anybody else can submit to unjust leaders or unjust masters. So this is the framework that he's giving for wives. And it's really a framework for success, radical obedience to Christ, whether that is for us today or for Christians 2,000 years ago. Wives can dress modestly. Why? Because they're supposed to be adorned in a way that will show Christ in their life. And Peter's hope here is that when they honor the husband in the home, and they dress in a way that shows honor to the husband outside of the home, that even an unbelieving husband would find this appealing and beautiful and lovely. And he will be drawn to this God. Because see, the culture, especially under Nero, was trying to paint Christians as the enemy, as taking the blame for all the ills in society. And Peter's trying to help these wives know that they have a role to play in convincing their husbands that their faith doesn't make them enemies to their husband. It doesn't make them unfaithful wives. And so what can we do today? Well, here's simple advice. Women, wives, dive deep into your church. Build into your church community. Build a theology of submission. Build a theology of beauty. Build a theology of sacrifice. And when you do that, I think you'll find that you have so much power by what Christ has given you and built in you to be vessels of his gospel to a broken world and even to a broken marriage.